In an age when the internet is undeniably the widest source of information available to the public, the starting point for most of our theses, MA students, and the way that we access entertainment, the internet has become essential to most people's lives. We hope that Ms. Heffernan's talk this evening will prompt everyone here to think a little bit deeper about a part of our world that we've come to take for granted. So without further delay, Virginia Heffernan.
Thank you. It's good to talk to graduate students, and makes me want to say that I, too, did a graduate degree. I have a doctoral degree in English from Harvard, and I say this not for brand recognition, not entirely, or even to just establish my credentials, but to be transparent about my vantage point. I came to the internet fairly fresh. Sorry, for the second time, I came to the internet fairly fresh out of graduate school. And at the time, and still now, I was absolutely obsessed with literary forms, with just the shape language can take, the way words can be arranged, committed, ironized, and the ways they can arrange, ironize, and commit us. It seemed fairly true to me, although probably indefensible, that on some level the language speaks us, as the deconstructionists used to say. And that there's certain things that we can't do, that we can't think without certain forms. So without the ballad meter, it would be impossible to think about love in certain ways and even to feel it in certain ways. Without the novel, we'd have a hard time understanding what the middle class is. Without epics, we'd have a hard time understanding heroism. And without tweets, we'd have a hard time understanding, well, that's what we're trying to figure out right now. So I had this pious admiration for form, and I started to pay kind of almost ominously close attention to form. Like maybe some of you, I have a little bit of OCD around the organization of letters. It just interests me where letters fall in sentences, and certain words take on this almost holy power to them. So that was one of the things that interested me in the internet, were how are these new forms, the Instagram photo, the Facebook post, the little film on Snapchat, a collage on Pinterest, a playlist on Spotify, determining how we think and how we live. So part of that comes from my graduate school training. But the other part comes from a very weird accident of my childhood. And that accident is that in 1979, I learned that the local college, Dartmouth College, its president had a plan to put in a huge mainframe computer in the middle of town. So this is ARPANET era. Most people they didn't know the internet by that name, but they thought of possibly this networked computing experiment as originating in California and having application mostly for the military. That's if they thought about it at all. But all of a sudden, before I had a personal computer, a computer that didn't speak to any other devices, we were starting to hear that there might be this thing that worked by various nodes where you would call in using a modem and a coupler device. It's like this sort of rubberized phone cradle that was like a kayak. I would think of it that you would take your phone and press it into it the way like people seal into a kayak. And I was really excited to hear about these things. But the new president of the college was excited to teach us about those things, mostly because he couldn't get the land to build his mainframe if he didn't commit to doing something for our little New England town. And the thing that he agreed reluctantly to do, this is John Kemeny, the author of the computer language BASIC. The thing he offered to do was to teach school children how to write BASIC. Then he would show that he was like a good, loyal citizen of the town of Hanover, and he would get the land to build a very not colonial building, this just studiedly ugly building called Kiewit that I think everyone thought was ugly, like even the designer of it, and that would really stand out amongst these colonial buildings. So our class shuffled down to the Dartmouth campus, and we sat in Silsby Hall, the political science department. And as kids, we just didn't know much what was going on, but we had been told in advance by our teachers that if we learned to program computers, that we would be able to reach the highest aspiration of mankind, to work for NASA. 10 years after the moon landing, and somehow if we went to this lecture and we like drew these strange things that he was telling us to, or typed them on paper, actually, we might walk on the moon like Neil Armstrong. I didn't know how we were going to get there, but I didn't have a choice. So we listened to this lecture. It was the first time I saw like a crossed zero, and we were taught to do a simple program in BASIC. And the program I made said of my brother, so I was 9, said of my brother, Andrew is an idiot. And that really seemed like the height of humor to me. Just something about seeing your own name in dot matrix, or your brother's name in that case. I just really couldn't get over it. So naturally, I wanted to hear more. And I assumed the rest of my classmates would too. But no, only me and 4 other kids were mesmerized, and everybody else filed out. So it was me and 4 boys, and we moved down to the front of the row to ask John Kemeny questions as if he were Mick Jagger. And the 4 boys went on to actually learn to code, and I took the road more traveled by and joined a chat room. Okay, so I was 9. I was looking for predators, of course, just like on the hunt. And I went to Kiewit, this computer center, to get myself hooked up with a computer. First, I had to persuade my parents that in my quest to be an astronaut, I definitely needed to get one of these computers for myself. And I somehow managed to bring them around to it. They got me one of these computers, and at Kiewit, they taught me how to dial into this place and how to join this thing called Conference XYZ. Conference XYZ was recognizable to me instantly because I was already interested in Dungeons and Dragons and other fantasy games. So we have massively multiplayer online role-playing games now. Think of this as a minutely multiplayer online role-playing game. I think there were 17 of us. And there was a time in 1980 where I confidently could have told you I knew every single person on the internet. And I think I would have been right. I would have been like, Apollo, Ladybug, Beetlebrowth, just like we all had our little names. Being 9, I chose an appropriate name for a freckled, chubby girl, Athena. I just wanted to be a wise warrior, and who wouldn't at that age? I noticed that my son he's 11, he looks a little like I did at that age. He made his first kind of avatar to go with his Google account, and I looked at his computer. He had taken 300 pictures of himself to get his profile photo, like we all do, and then cut it down and filtered it and done all this stuff to it. But so I said, why did you choose the one you chose? There's so many other cute ones. And he said, because I chose this one going like this, because I look powerful. My little corner office CEO kid, really persuading them, I think, on Google that he's a force to be reckoned with. Anyway, I was Athena, and the serious part of this is that I of course I fell in love with the chatting, and a lot of the little conceits we had in that original fantasy game that had a lot of chat to it. But there were also strange aesthetic elements to just joining the computer that I became I just cathected all this emotion on. So the first time I heard that eek on my phone to dial in, I just felt like that squeal and crash of all the information in the world coming onto this little desk in the corner of my parents' bedroom. And later when I heard the word bandwidth, what I thought of, I still don't know what those two sounds actually signal, but I thought that somehow the first one was like the sound of the pipe, like something like something making like a high taut sound. And the second was like too much stuff trying to cram through it. But into my house, into my desk, into my head, my eyes. And what it came into was this thing that they called a dumb terminal. So it's not quite smartphone, dumb phone. It's dumb like a Chromebook is dumb. Like it doesn't do anything until you connect it to the internet. So this had no life in its little dumb airhead until it got smart and connected to the mainframe. The interface of that computer became my world. And this is what the interface was: a black screen and green phosphor letters in the front. You can picture it from war games, and any movie about early computing. Some of the computers had amber letters. Some of them had green letters. They never had a palette of more than on, off, green or black. And not, I think, because of any exploration of my own, but simply because I was exposed to this thing, hour after hour, day after day, because I loved playing this game so much. I should incidentally say I tied up the family's one phone line all the time. And when my mother would say, "Stop playing the computer, I have an important call to make," did I say like, "Oh my God, I'm so sorry, you have an adult life to live"? No, I was like, "I'm Athena, leave me alone." So I stared at this thing, and as the letters that increasingly formed themselves in front of me said very potent things to a girl becoming 10, 11, 12, sometimes conversations about Reaganomics or about professional football or things I really, had no business having firm opinions about, but was happy to be listened to on. All the way to like quite personal questions, questions about emotions or questions about my hopes or, what I hope to learn in the world or who I thought I was in the world. The contrast between the letters that bodied forth this incredibly emotional experience and that deep black yonder, it started to suggest like a whole cosmology to me. And I've had this conversation with other people who grew up with that interface. And I think it was a common experience to start thinking that it was almost like space. Like there was a deep black space, and was the ground of experience. And then on it, like those letters in Star Wars, was something inscribed, like the constellation, something you could make meaning of. And the power of the absolutely unknowable back there, and the incredibly meaningful, powerful letters in the foreground came to shape everything that went after that. So in some ways, Magic and Loss, this book, The Internet as Art, the new book, is an effort to fathom that dark space. And I think as soon as I took a hiatus from the internet, about the time that friends of mine started to think I spent so much time on it that they would sing the song Desperado whenever I came around, and I'm not even kidding. I resolved I would never get on the computer again. And incidentally, I called it The Computer, and what I thought I was doing on The Computer was playing. So, sometimes I think that how we come to networked computing is how we continue to think of it. So if you can't use it as a work tool, if you use it to watch Netflix and be entertained by it, if it seems like a proxy for a television set, for whatever reason, or if it seems like a way to write, if it seems like a form of social life, I always thought about it as a game with, as we'd say now, social elements, or a gamified social experience. And partly that's because my mother, would yell, "Stop playing the computer." So I was playing when I was on the computer, and I still see it as playing. The other really serious lesson of that time that I hope I can somehow impart to you is that because I thought I was playing, and because though I had played Atari, I wasn't all that used to video games, my analog for the way that I was playing was something closer to like pinball or Monopoly. And in pinball, you don't mistake yourself for the token of you. You don't mistake yourself for the ball. So when the ball goes down the chute in pinball, you don't die, you lose that ball, and you're aiming to get an extra ball, not an extra life. In Monopoly, you don't suddenly crash through reality and decide you are the shoe or the dog or the thimble. And one of them doesn't exist anymore, so I think the thimble's been outlawed. And so I was very determined when I left off being Athena and rejoined CompuServe in the early 90s that I would not make the mistake that I knew it was quite tempting to make, to think that my online experiences were my real experiences. They were so heightened. I knew they were so heightened, and I knew that it was a form unlike forms I spoke in normal life. And I knew that Athena was not me. I mean, part of the reason for making your first avatar, like my son did, very divergent from you. Later you can bring them together, but just to sensitize yourself to that huge gap between online life and offline life. So, your first avatar should be a cleric or Superman or a dwarf or Athena. Later, typically, children discover that the invulnerability that they first wanted might cost them contact with other people. And that's when you get your second generation names, which are like sad brunette, tired gay boy. I expect that my son will have those before too long. But all of those should push the boundaries of who you are. What's been insidious about Facebook, because if the internet is, as I say in the book, an imaginative experiment, an experiment that should encourage shape-shifting and role-playing, is that Facebook has asked us to line very closely up our physical identities with our online identities. But even there, if you're skilled enough, I know that my children don't always look as happy, or almost ever look as happy as they do on Facebook. I mean, these are set pieces that I think we're all familiar with by now. There's no treachery in it. It's just you don't take pictures of people with half expressions or looking gravely unhappy or ugly. And then I don't, I'm my resume. I have my resume on Facebook. I have very worked on language on Facebook. Nothing is even as sort of real and stuttery as it is when I stand before you. And right now I'm in a, state of heightened use of language. So drawing that distinction, almost relentlessly drawing that distinction between life and art, or life and artifice, I think has been a way for not just and I don't always do this, but not just to avoid the downsides and pitfalls and disorientation of online, but more than that, to enjoy the upsides of it. Here there are just so many canons of books that treat the internet as though it were a neurotoxin, poisoning us all the time. In Japan, it's the reverse. The internet has been greeted by liberal sociologists as finally an antidote to the straitened real life that we have to live all the time. Name, rank, serial number, show up, wear a suit, sharp elbows, loud voices, proper comportment, not too fat, too black, too old. Finally, here's a place where you not only get to be, as loud and boisterous as you want, you can join Second Life and be a deer if you want. To, in a certain, bygone way of thinking about childhood creativity, that should be cause for celebration instead of cause for alarm. Part of the reason that I say the internet is the great masterpiece of civilization is, of course, not to say that it's all morally good. I mean, when we're talking about art, we're also including doggerel, bad art, malevolent art, art that gets used, by fascists and dictators and autocrats, art that's levied for all kinds of bad purposes. But part of the reason I say that is that, put very schematically, civilization has been a progression of abstraction, of increasing generations of abstraction. So just to put this very, as I say, very schematically, you can think of finance this way, as starting with mined gold, going through gold ingots, inscribed gold, where the language gives them part of the value of the language and the images, to inscribed pieces of paper, not unlike literature itself, to electronic pulses, to Bitcoin. There's nothing more abstract in the world than Bitcoin. One of my favorite, I want to actually make a mashup of people explaining Bitcoin, because I just saw Joey Ito at the MIT Media Lab do it, and he can explain anything. And he just said, okay, it's very simple. There's a fraction of a difference in the end of this programming problem, and that can be leveraged and it just 15 minutes passed, and I've just never been more, I just was I think he switched into fractals and spun himself into some new kind of organism while he was talking. And that was the clearest explanation I've ever gotten. So increasing abstraction. Similarly with religion, the history of monotheism is the history of the abolition of animal sacrifice, of excessive bloodshed, down to prayer as a substitute for those kind of sacrifices. And prayer is very abstract. Abstraction brings problems with it. There are, even in this administration, you can hear hints of people afraid of, say, finance, afraid of education. afraid of literacy, afraid that we are like somehow moving away from our, oh gosh, what's that song that's like hunting, fishing, loving every day or whatever? I don't know. Somehow that plus Farmers Only, the red state dating app. Has anyone seen that? It's really like my favorite thing in the world, the ads. Because, okay, so they're for men who are like tired of like lawyers from New York who can't do anything, but it's just a very punishing little scenario they have where the guy gets a date that's like, looks like, Sex in the City, like someone comes in like completely overdressed in makeup to like a fishing expedition or a horseback riding, and basically the conceit of the ad is to murder her. So she like, in one of them, she gets on a horse, she catches her heel on the like stirrup, and then is dragged to a bloody pulp like she was on a United flight or something, and then like a good true girl, like earthy person in a MAGA cap comes in and she saves the day because she has waiters or she knows how to ride a horse. Basically it's just like all the accoutrements of civilization, the dressing, the fashion, the makeup, the artifice, and then the intimation that she's a professional, that she doesn't do something with her hands. And the like anxiety, but also contempt for that is actually a hallmark of far right thinking. They call this blood and soil. So what's interesting is that we all suffer this abstraction anxiety when it comes to the internet. So very well-meaning books recently that seem inarguable have pointed out how much teenage girls suffer at the hands of cyberbullies and with new mechanisms and technologies for hazing and aggression. And I read one of them, and it did have these like devastating stories about girls having to make moral decisions about whether to, take their tops off on camera or take selfies that were provocative, and then possibly suffer the humiliation of having those pictures sold or grafted onto other naked pictures, and then those sold and distributed. And I mean, I haven't been the victim of anything like that, but, I've had many days of like fairly bruising trolling, and, I can tell you it is hell. It's really horrible. But to have a whole sex ed curriculum around the possibilities of having your picture taken and distributed on the internet is very different from the sex ed I had, maybe you had, about, where it was mostly rape and pregnancy and AIDS that we were worried about, actual damage to the body. And I don't know, it may be unpopular to say this, but I think Instagram hazing, by contrast, is a reform. You don't die. You don't die when someone creates a Finsta with hideous images. So abstraction can be scary. And it can be scary, it amazes me, but lots and lots of journalists, even in the current climate, refuse to use Twitter. And one of them told me recently, and I don't blame her for this, but it just surprised me, for fear of being called fat on on Twitter. In response, I wrote this piece and published it just on Medium to say, you can handle being called an ugly fool, because if those letters, F-A-T, very painful, I understand, but they can't go to your bloodstream. Like, you have to be able to bear those words, or you will stop speaking out. That can't be enough to intimidate you. So bearing that in mind, that, I have a tolerance, and I understand I have a predisposition for liking abstraction. I don't like being outside. I like reading books. I don't like dirt. I don't like physical exercise. I'm the sitting duck for the internet. Those of you who like to get outside, do CrossFit and stuff, I get it that the internet seems annoying. But to me, all I ever wanted to do was read and write. And when I saw that the internet gave me a chance to read and write and also meet people, share ideas, I just was like, I've hit the jackpot. I don't have to put on a suit and get a job and, sit around a table to talk to people about all these things. So that's why I love the internet. As I say, in the high school, I popped off it because I really thought that I didn't have a prayer of actually, getting anywhere in the world. And I could only tell myself so long that I was never going to play a sport or go to a high school dance. or I was going to be sidelined from all social life. So I turned on computing, and I sort of understand how people like my colleague who doesn't want to use Twitter, or people who get this like just enormous allergy or overwhelm in the face of especially social networks feel, because the thing that started to scare me about Conference XYZ was just the masquerade and the crossing, double crossing, and not knowing who I was talking to. As we got better at it, we started to, a little bit of catfishing, maybe, like, all the things that we know have names now, sock puppetry and catfishing and trolling, had analogs in 1979. Trolling, it's sometimes I can find someone who remembers this. Trolling was called, or there was a version of trolling called scrolling. Anyone? Where you would just send someone, because, okay, you would just send someone a whole bunch of ampersands. Okay, that's it. It was pretty painful, as you can imagine. It was a big stand, but they would call, do you know what that is? You remember? Okay, yeah. I mean, it's a little like ASCII, because sometimes you'd create a profile or something, but it would suddenly make their computer like go way out. It was like the screen would scroll, and at the bottom you'd be like, you've been scrolled. All right. So, I mean, just imagine how harmless and silly that is. But also in those days, the master of the chat could cut you off the whole internet, like ban you for the whole day if you scrolled someone, and it would just say, you've been terminated. So it was sort of like, I don't know, like what there is now is both tamer and less tame, but it's no less abstract. There is a way to get distance from it, and say, I am not that photoshopped image of myself, I'm not even a regular picture of myself on Instagram. The book, I don't know the book's around, but if it's around, glance at my author photo on it. It's this like beautiful picture of someone in black and white. And the first time I gave a talk about magic and loss was to my daughter's first grade class. And, I talked very briefly about, that the magic in the book is that, like, oh my gosh, I got this thing to work in Minecraft. And the loss in the book is that kind of sick feeling you have when you've been on the computer too long. Any questions? One kid raises his hand. Yeah, Itai. Your picture. Why don't you look like your picture? And I was like, exactly, that's it. I don't look like my picture because I am not something created on a computer. I'm not. The picture, like, if you really think about it, the picture is not just me in a studio with makeup somebody else made, hair color somebody else applied, all this stuff glopped on me. That would be Dayenu. That would be like, of course that would be a lot of artifice. But this is taken and then extended and created. I might as well have had John Singer Sargent paint my portrait for how much a vanity picture this is of me. And I have no shame in being different from that picture, because to the degree that I believe I have to look like that picture, I've made that elementary mistake of thinking I am the ball in pinball. I'm the shoe in Monopoly. This is a thing holding the place for me in digital space. So when parents ask, but increasingly people ask for themselves, how to address the anxiety of being online, that the feeling of loss that is the way I describe it in the book. I tend to ask that they talk to and consult with artists friends of theirs or novelists friends of theirs about character creation. I mean, it is crazy that we preach abstinence. I now have an app that enforces that I take 20 minutes off my phone, but the abstinence, or the like, you have to keep 3 feet on the floor, or you can only go to second base approach to sex, that is similar to the approach to computers to me. That's you can use it 10 minutes before you go to bed, or not in the morning, or whatever. Much more effective, I think, is thinking of yourself as an artist when you're online. You're very carefully styling words. I mean, I've attempted to write, I'm a terrible poet, but I've attempted to write, in tight Sestina Villanelle forms before. Nothing compares to writing on Twitter. It's so hard. I mean, and I've been doing it for a long time. I tweet all the time. It's terrifying to see the number of tweets that I've posted. And I still can't entirely get the hang of it. There are people that are so good at it. Matt Iglesias, so good at it. Louise Mensch, so good at it. Just incredibly good practitioners of the form. And the amount of time you spend thinking of should you tag someone? Should this be a reply? Should this be like a retweet with a top to it? Or in the old days, we used to like have, modified tweets. If you quote something from a newspaper, how much can you compress it? I mean, all of you know these things, down to small things that, heavy users know, which is like, if you want to begin a tweet with a tag of someone else, can someone else fill this in? You have to decide if you want to be sure everyone sees it to put a dot before their @ thing, or only the people that follow both of you will see it. I mean, these are, and I'm just scratching the surface. These are things that are harder than writing very difficult poetry and harder to bear in mind. And you have 140 characters to do it in. I mean, I've become so accustomed, and I should barely admit this, but so accustomed to Twitter, and especially dealing with this election in tweets, that I have a meditation practice. I go to meditate in the morning. I'm supposed to clear my thoughts, and these are the things that occur to me. Possible tweets. Would they catch on? Would they be retweeted? It's like, I am not in the present moment. I have to like banish, the idea of tweeting from my mind. I'll hear someone say that and think like, that's 140 characters and you could still tag someone. But that's what I say about our thoughts being determined by Twitter. But when you're doing something so formal as that, to mistake that for who you really are, is I think to give short shrift to the artist in you, that likes that highly aestheticized, rarefied ritual of contributing to. And I haven't mentioned, some of the platforms are ones that I'm not as interested in or good at. Snapchat, Pinterest in particular is one that I just, I've tried many, many times and I just don't have a great feel for it. But Pinterest, they all come with their own rules. And I think that native players with these forums, and I say that because I still see them as games, get that, that you are not your avatar. I was going through a particularly rough period after getting heavily trolled. My Wikipedia entry was being vandalized, and someone was determined every time, I had a friend who was sort of reverting it for me, trying to keep it like not PR, but just a normal Wikipedia entry without this bad stuff in it. And he had an alert. So from Spain, he would like swoop in a few minutes and change it back to the thing. And they were just in this back and forth. And I was talking to a therapist and I said, it's just terrible if my Wikipedia entry comes up first for me in Google returns. And it has, this thing that I can't seem to get away from. And she said this thing that I think of now as like a Zen koan, which is, what if you are not your Wikipedia entry? It's like, whoa. And I started to talk. I was like, no, I am my Wiki. And then I was suddenly like, what am I doing? I've talked about this before, and someone was like, but what if, when your Citibank account gets hacked, what if you are not your Citibank account even, What if the proxies for you that are online, even your bank account, are not actually you? I mean, it seems like a first lesson of Plato to think you are not your net worth. So the next book, well, I'll just quickly sketch how the book proceeds, and then I hope we can go to questions. Is that about good timing? So the book is divided into magic and loss. The magic is something like I just described, just that sense of awe that that I still get around new kinds of software, new games, really clever uses of existing games and platforms, sudden new respect for an old one. Sometimes there'll be like an upgrade of iOS or even horrible Microsoft Word, and I'll just begrudgingly have to be like, no, it's a good idea. That really works. Sometimes new iconography, a lot of us found it with the machine learning at Spotify, that recommending system. Sometimes that awe is sort of backwards awe, like, oh, this is terrible. This is terrifying. I've been a big follower of YouTube comments for a long time. And so that really kind of swashbuckling, contemptuous way of talking, like about religion, is very familiar to me. It wasn't new to me when Richard Spencer and other people surfaced as just out and out neo-Nazis. I think if you hung out in YouTube comments enough, you might have heard that idiom around. And that can be quite scary. On the other hand, I think a lot of us, when we first saw that polyglot, subliterate content, the comment section of YouTube, it just was like, wow, there's more in heaven and earth than dreamt of in your philosophy, like in Hamlet. It's just, you could never think of any of this stuff. So that is sort of the magic. And I treat the magic in 5 forms that are just classical forms. I knew it would be a stretch to say the internet is art, so I just stayed to things that are fairly uncontested as art. The internet is doesn't use a lot of experimental forms, interestingly. So Instagrams I put on a continuum with frescoes and other 2-dimensional images, mostly, and they're mostly representational, probably impressionistic. They use very sweet filters, and even our cameras give it a sweet, unrealistic color. Generally intended to show the beauty of life. Twitter, you'd think that people on Instagram and people on Twitter didn't live anywhere near each other, that they're just whole different souls. Sometimes, Instagram, leaving outside the fake Instagram accounts, the Finsta accounts, and the more aggressive brazen accounts. A lot of Instagram is in a very narrow emotional band, and very bourgeois and very sweet. And there's certain things that that just don't show up on there. But the rise of self-portraiture in the form of selfies, I don't think we could have anticipated, but it's a trick of the camera that you can flip it around very easily, and that people got interested both in their own appearance and also in dramatizing their own vanity, which was a surprise to me. I think that I probably didn't want to have my picture taken very much as an adolescent because I wasn't, physically comfortable. But more than that, I wouldn't have wanted me to look like I was trying to look good in a picture. And yet all selfies look like you're trying to look good in a picture. And that seems like an incredible vulnerability to the form that I think has sort of been overlooked in the idea that it's just a narcissistic display. So anyway, Instagram is in the image chapter. The design chapter treats the history of the internet along the history of cities. So one of the central points of it is that the web became this kind of teeming place with broken links and sites like Yahoo that looked like the old Times Square, junky, non-design, constantly designed to pick your pocket, make you enter information you don't want to, get on an ad you don't want to see. And right about that time, there was some kind of bourgeois flight to apps. It's not surprising to me that apps look like suburbs. They look like an aerial view of Levittown, just they're all the same size. How strange. The web in the beginning days was all, why aren't any apps bigger or different shapes? I don't know. But, it's like Apple Crest Estates. It's like, Mar-a-Lago gated, whatever. And it's basically the water that was available to us for free, on Yahoo and with Hotmail and stuff is suddenly decanted and sold to us in bottles. And, you usually pay a price for it with the apps, or you often end up paying a price for it. But by the way, the sort of on the other hand part of that chapter is that some people thought the 70s were the best time to be in New York, that there are really interesting things going on obscure message boards or on the YouTube comments or Web 1.0, especially these big boards that really interest me. But and then the other thing is I had to contend with the part of me that was yeah, I want to get out of here too. The first time I ever left the city and went to someone's Dallas McMansion, I was oh, this stupid McMansion. And then I was whoa, the way they have many refrigerators and stuff, or just these crazy stocked fridges, and you never leave the inside. You just stay in air conditioning into the car, into the mall home. I was just I'll have what they're having. What have I been telling myself? So there's obviously a beauty to apps. So that's that chapter. There's a chapter on music. That is music. Digital music is the thing that first produced in me that feeling of loss that's in the title. And I get the word loss from a term of art from sound engineers. That's lossy compression. It's when a big sound signal is turned into an MP3, you're taking like a lot of heft to the signal and turning it into this very thin, flattened signal. But for complicated reasons that I might liken to if I took a photograph of a thick painting of Abraham Lincoln and it looked roughly like the same painting because you weren't really aware of the texture to begin with, but the second one was 2D, that's sort of an MP3's relation to the big signal. And instantly when the iPod appeared, I couldn't notice it. I don't have very good ears, but I kept hearing people talk about like something was lost. Even people who couldn't identify what they were missing would start to say, it's something I don't like about music anymore. Like I've lost my will to love music. So I wanted to know, what were we like grieving about? And that's how the loss came in. Video is a huge part of the book because YouTube was sort of my gateway drug to Web 2.0. I just was really, really enchanted, especially by these videos of guitarists. And so that's in there. And also the first video ever on YouTube, me at the zoo. Very interesting subject of study. So video where I talked about painting and music, and these are traditional forms. Oh, and poetry with the Twitter chapter. That one for YouTube is about performance and dance mostly. A lot of the videos are show, song, and dance, which is as old as the Greeks, at least. So it's not very controversial to call photography, dance, music, art. Sometimes I feel like I get lost in that and I start thinking of definitions of art. The next book is about anti-digital culture. Partly, and I'll say this right before we go to questions, my son, who I mentioned before, I really wanted to get him a phone. He's 11, all his friends have phones, they're all trying to reach him and he didn't have one. So I proposed to get him one and he said, okay, but he was very skeptical. I got him one for his birthday and he panicked right before his birthday, said, you can't give me that. He doesn't want a phone and right now is determined never to get one. He has 3 reasons and they're all like manly reasons about his pre-adolescent manhood. The first is only girls get addicted to texting. So he tends to like tease his male friends who text. And I noticed it one day after school when he went up to a very close friend of his. I mean, this wasn't as mean as it sounds. And just went texty, texty, emoji, emoji to him when he was playing with his phone. All right. Thing number 2, this is going to curb my resourcefulness. I'm just beginning to learn my way around the subway and the street and, be able to do things. And now I'll be like looking at the GPS all the time. I would need to learn things. I can't just like be calling them up on Wikipedia all the time. And last, of course, this is apron strings. You just want to keep an eye on me, So the idea that I was trying to keep him young and keep him from like realizing his full yang potential, was to me a harbinger that maybe we really are going to try to detach, that we really are like that it's costly to us. It's costly to our souls and senses of selves to be this dependent. There's a recent Jim Jarmusch movie that the lead character won't get a phone either, and he just says it's a leash. If we start feeling like that phones have made us less free instead of more free, we may actually start to put them down. And then, of course, the rise of all these anti-digital practices, everything from making your own ukuleles to butchering your own meat to, these like comically material practices that immerse us in away from the promise of immortality that they're striving for at Google, that the cloud purports to represent, into embracing our humanity and our mortality as, a feature and not a bug of being human is that we die. So I hope that die isn't too sad a note to end on, but I'll end there, and I'd love to get some questions. Laura. Hi. Texty, texty, emoji, emoji. Yeah. Well, I do. I do some of the just deliberate artificial breaks on my experience. Right now, I'm using an app called Forest that it's. I don't know if anyone knows about it, but you like grow a tree for every 30 seconds you don't touch. 30 minutes you don't touch your phone. If you touch it in the time, the tree dies. So it's very. And after a while, it starts planting actual trees for you. So it like incentivizes you like doing things in the world, sort of. So I use that to keep away from it. I don't look at it. I mean, just by habit, I don't look at it half an hour after I get up. I put it down half an hour before I go to bed. I take 2 hours off from it in the day, sometimes using the Forest thing, and I don't use it when I'm talking to people. So those are my. But sometimes I am itching to use it. You know, I can't lie about that, and I tell myself it's for work. But I also. It's kind of interesting to design an exit strategy. I don't know if that moment will ever come, but I think about what getting off might look like. But not right now. It's like, the media kept thinking, what do we need? We need a mobile strategy. We need a way to get millennials. We need a way to do this. What we needed was a huge story. It's like Moby Dick. I mean, nothing has been better, obviously, for interest in media than our Moby Dick, the great orange whale. Anybody else?
Yeah, on that. I'm actually really fascinated in what you said about Twitter being poetry, and it sort of relates to what you just said. Do you think we can qualify Donald Trump then as a poet? And in that respect, could he also be considered perhaps the most successful commercial poet of all time?
Yeah, it's so funny. I just was talking with someone about this, and I think it would be hard to say, right, it would be hard to say he's not. I mean, part of the reason I started writing about politics is that I've followed Donald Trump, I think, since he got on Twitter, and I'm very familiar with his style. So it was, fairly easy to begin to talk about his tweets when he became a candidate. His style has a lot of hallmarks. Past dictators have also been writers, have been producers of propaganda. It's not, it doesn't say anything one way or the other to say that they use a kind of a very highly aestheticized use of language. I mean, not to, tread into territory we don't want to be in, but, fascism is obsessed with presentationalism. And so it's not surprising he does those things. I mean, not all poetry, most poetry is amoral as a form. So, we're not saying anything about it being benevolent, and we are also not saying that it's, good poetry. One thing that's very interesting about Trump's style is that he, do you know the work of J.L. Austin at all, the linguist, or the idea of speech acts? So, J.L. Austin has an essay called How to Do Things with Words. He's a British philosopher in the last century, and he argues that a lot of speech doesn't describe the world or doesn't act like it's apart from the world, but rather does something in its utterance. Like an utterance does something, is an act, not a description. So, and Trump is really like that. I mean, I was hearing this thing about the articles of impeachment on Trumpcast, and when Trump says something, he's actually not protected by the First Amendment in the same way that we are, or at least protected by impeachment. When he charges Obama with wiretapping, and that charge is just a tweet, it's just 140 characters or less, that is consequential in a different way because the president says it. It's like the King's Speech. He speaks at some point, like a king as we, or like for our nation. And so what his speech is doing, it's so consequential, to have that much. I mean, plenty of people have been fired now for tweets, have had in Anthony Weiner's case, disgrace or its marriage breakup over tweets, and Twitter DMs. But Trump, is maybe baiting North Korea, he may be causing wars, and he's already done quite a bit of damage. But I really like this question because it's hard territory to tread in, because we really want to think that art is always a good thing, And when I say it's a civilization, Rome was to a civilization, the ex-civilization, and and it's interesting and often chilling.
Thank you very much.
Thank
Anybody
you.
else?
Hi.
Hi.
As the kind of building blocks of the desktop internet kind of fade into the background as we move to mobile, what do you see? And I would say there you kind of have this compression of the layers of abstraction, right? And as we move to pure photos or stories as a format or live, which is bringing synchronicity back to communications, both whether it's in a one-to-one or small group context, how do you reconcile that with your idea of abstraction? What do you see? How do you see that playing out in the short term and kind of as one looks further out to augmented and virtual reality?
The move from desktop to mobile as an another step in abstraction.
The abstraction is actually compressing because you no longer have a URL, you just have content is presented to you there.
Right. Yeah. It closes down the steps. I mean, the sort of I could be wrong, but it seems like the system of metaphors has grown more on the nose with apps. Like there's certain things with hyperlinks, the Yahoo homepage, which is just so worth studying, until it is no more. We should, have a moment of reverence for it. Just that hyperlinks and the double underline that they now have and certain things are so cryptic. Like they just, and there's a learning curve for them where the, it's amazing. All the language around the early internet and early hardware, that some of the things that the, Steve Wozniak and Stuart Brand's crowd and all these, early hackers, the thing that made them respectable is that they were brought in to write manuals. And, they were the only people could do them. And they wrote these brilliant, jokey, strange manuals with so much going on. And apps just don't have anything like a manual. I mean, the games that I learn now, they don't even tell you 3 rules. You just are supposed to find your way through the images with it. So there's much less language on mobile. Move from language to iconography. I don't know if that's a move to increasing abstraction. I'm not totally sure. I mean, yeah. Oh, I see. Well, okay, with virtual reality and augmented reality, and I may be alone in saying this, but I've now spent a lot of time with VR, and I think the Emperor still has no clothes. Like, I just don't think... it's amazing to me that 2 years ago, Mark Zuckerberg said that the Oculus would be the new iPhone. That was just a big bet. And I liked Pokemon Go, I like Pokemon Go because in a way it reinscribed what we already have, which is I wear reading glasses now, and being both here and there at the same time requires, either progressives or that I move my glasses down. And so it has made me hyper aware of that I'm in 2 spaces, there, walking, trying not to run into things, but also living very much here. And I liked with Pokemon Go that it was right, of course, there are digital artifacts occluding our, a sense of real space. But I was happy to get it back in the form that I had it. As for virtual reality itself, I mean, it's very much a toss-up if you'll ever hit that highly pleasurable state of presence in virtual reality. I've only hit it a couple of times. And if you don't hit it, it's banal to nauseating. And if you do hit it, it's not something you want all the time anyway, So I'm in place of AR and VR. I think what's next is this aggressive pushback on digital. In some really interesting and weird forms.
Thank you so much.
Sure.
So, bizarrely, in the last month, I've had a few people come up to me and tell me about how social media or the internet or their relationship with these systems has impacted their relationships.
Like romantic relationships.
Romantic relationships and or friendships,
Yeah.
things of that nature. And I'm just really curious about that subject and would love to know.
I have a friend who's a divorce lawyer, and she said literally 100% of the people who come to her say, you know, she's taking like an intake and getting their story, and it never doesn't begin. My phone broke, so I picked up his phone and texts. You know, she's just like, let me guess, you found the text. Okay, let's move on. So, yeah, I mean, the you know, digital lipstick on the collar or whatever. I mean, the anxiety, as you point out, I think about a lot relationships, especially in the last romantic relationships, especially in the last 10 years, has also been, you know, has also been anxiety about technology. So like, it's been a while since I wrote about this, but the last time I did, I think Mark Sanford and David Petraeus and some other public figures had been found out for, you know, and Tiger Woods have been found out for like digital indiscretions. And a lot of what they had done was entirely the creation of intellectual property on their phones. Like basically just, they had just been emailing compulsively. Like they hadn't been, I'll tell you another way into this. The editor of Modern Love, you know, the column in the New York Times, said initially all the essays that he got, or a lot of them said, I've hooked up with someone, we have a physical relationship, we have no emotional relationship, and now he regularly gets things saying, all we do is text and I've never seen her naked. You know, I've never touched her face. And, you know, it was sort of like, all we do is create intellectual property in a frenzy for each other, and we've like got, you know, volumes and volumes and volumes of texts and like, you know, Instagram pictures and funny links that we sent each other or whatever, but there's actually been no infidelity or no copulation, no whatever. So, you know, what are we doing in those manic clandestine texting spaces? Like we're creating new characters to be and probably trespassing in ways that, you know, have yet to be sort of limbed and understood for us. Like just what counts as an indiscretion in a text box, you know? You know, it can be very, very bracing to see someone you're involved with, see their like other emails, but they also are only email. You know, everyone's like navigating that for themselves. You know, I think especially when people try to police it from the outside, I don't like seeing people getting fired for stuff like that because I don't think we know what it is exactly. I don't think that digital crimes, up into and including stuff like doxing, you know what that is? Like publishing someone's address, which, you know, could be seen as a goad to like go attack them. I don't even think doxing should be illegal speech, you know, or fireable offense, but fortunately, I don't have to make all those calls. Yeah, it is. I mean, just this thing of like people falling in love with their phones more than with another person, you know? I mean, I saw a friend of mine having an affair with someone and I was just like, this is what her romantic relationship looks like. You know, it's like not that sexy, you know, and just like, oh, I gotta get that link to send to him because he's gonna crack up at this. It's just like, that looks like, I don't know, like that does not look like Anna Karenina to me. That doesn't look like a romance. That looks like some just like weird fidgety OCD thing. But I guess I'm not a very good sexter.
Thank you. Just coming back to your notion of abstraction and less or more, that direction of where we're going. I'm really fascinated by it because I was lucky to get on the internet in New York back in early 90s with Stacey Horn on New York and fell in love with everybody who was on it.
Yeah.
But it was mainly women. It was definitely predominantly women, and they were kind of lost that territory slightly.
Yeah.
Where Twitter was dominated by men. And I'm very excited by Instagram, which is again dominated by women. So I sort of would like to explore what's your feeling on where we're going with less abstraction, and does it contribute to gender rescue at this point?
Echo and The Well were like, I was too late for them, but they were just, I think of them as this like heaven that I wish I'd been a part of, you know, like Gloria Steinem's like feminist satyrs or something, like just, and I want to hear more about them from you. I mean, to me, the internet, like a lot of social life, seems to be moving to like this gender segregation in a weird way. I mean, so much of my social life is just all women. I don't know why. It wasn't that way for my parents, but just, another night. And I feel like men just pick up the slack around that. Like they don't design the all men night. They just do like another girls' night. But I don't know, maybe that's just me, but it's right. Twitter has this like yangy, aggressive, and when I get on it, I like that too, And then Pinterest and Instagram, soften the lens a little bit, and they're more for families. And I think Facebook, because Facebook's such a nice retirement community now, fortunately, since we have no young people anymore, it became good again. You can just talk to normal people who like write in mixed cases with regular things to say, and it's so reasonable. Lots of grandmothers. I just feel like it feels. I mean, I think Facebook has actually become a really nice place for women. I do a lot of Facebook groups, secret or invite-only Facebook groups that are all women. I mean, a lot of them actually, especially beginning with Hillary. There was a gay one that called Hillary as Madonna for men that I never got invited to, but they spent the whole time supposedly just being like, she's so beautiful, I love her outfit, isn't she amazing, she's so hot. I wish I'd gotten on that one. But Pantsuit Nation, is enormous, and still vibrant. A lot of viral posts on there. Yeah, I mean, it does seem sort of segregated. Like the Facebook groups, especially of where I go to escape to like just people like me or whatever. Sometimes when I speak to college students, they'll like tell me about a new one, and this guy said he had like 2 interests and he just only hung around on Spaces for those interests, which reminds me of the early internet, and they were hip hop and couponing. And he was like really freaking into couponing, and it was like he had so many good tips about it that I like was just writing down manically. I just like, what kind of chump have I been not to be couponing all these years?
Yeah, just going off of what you were saying about JLL Austin and his lecture. So regarding illocutionary and perlocutionary acts, what do you consider internet as like art itself, or as a platform for art? What do you think is a more important function of it? Like
the internet?
Yeah.
So my friend Andrew Blum has this book called The Tubes, and he basically is interested in, there's 7 layers that are, engineers describe the internet on, and they're dirt to Gmail. So it's like the apps are up here. And, I might even get even more snowflakey than just Gmail to describe the thing that interests me, which is like the content of the emails, that look more like a sonnet or a paragraph, or something that, we can recognize as art. But I know that it's hard, for instance, to find, even with Trump's tweets, it's hard to find an opus of tweets or a single tweet, moreover, that's hard, that you could like pull out of the system and have it sing as a work of art on its own. I mean, just simply put, like if you didn't have access also to the person's bio and who they followed and who followed them and all the context that you use to understand a tweet, it just is really hard to imagine it as a freestanding Emily Dickinson poem, Donald Trump. I mean, Donald Trump we know enough about, but Matt Iglesias. And then without seeing all the people who've written back to him or didn't write back to him or retweeted him or didn't after time, or where it sat in all the other tweets, or, if it was part of a larger conversation or what it was riffing on, or, so that leads me to believe that the system of Twitter is itself a form of art, or that you wouldn't be able to, that there's something in that, something in the algorithm that's the thing that I marvel at when I'm looking at Twitter. Not like, oh, amazing, we found these like very cryptic writers who put together an anthology. It's just like, how does this happen? How does this happen? Each little change, why did they do that? But then a lot of people go me one better and think that it might be, well, all the way down to fiber optics. There are certainly people that thought like the aqueducts and then the deep engineering in Rome would qualify as art. And I wouldn't go that far down, but I can see that argument. And then I'm leaving out the vast territory of that language that is so cryptic. It's called code, just code. It's not called Morse code. It's not called, coded language. It's just code itself. And that is somewhere in the territory of, that's Bitcoin. That's like a level of abstraction that we don't have a precedent for. I could go either way. I'd leave it to a hacker to explain to me its relationship to what we call art. That's why I use the word art in the book only for traditional forms as they manifest on the internet, where I'll get no argument. It is like very, very, very hard to argue that a photograph on Instagram is not a photograph. Yeah, but if any coders have some idea about this, I like hearing about it. I'm glad you know someone so J.L. Austin so well. Yeah. Have you read some of the stuff about like whether Trump will be prosecuted for inciting violence with Get Him Out of Here? It's like the speech acts in the rallies are really contested right now. Like even lock her up. Apparently if she'd been within a mile and he'd said lock her up, it might have been incitement to like a lynching, Great guy, that president, he's just, he's just charmer. Anybody else? Yeah.
So while you were talking, I was thinking about the experience that I have where people take a photo, arrange something for Instagram, but they don't actually engage with that in real life. They're just doing it for the photo.
Right.
And I was thinking while you're talking that you probably think that this is art rather than something, a person not living life really.
Yeah, you definitely do. I mean, as long ago as the 50s, I think there's this German play, I don't know why this is coming to mind, but The Visit of the Old Woman, Der Besuch der alten Dame, and I remember there's a line in it, like, a news crew says, like, do this thing again für die Film Glockenspiel, for the camera, and that is always, struck a squeamish, uncanny valley note in people that, we're cheating out for cameras all the time. But it's been a long time we've been used to that. In the beginning I was talking about forms that program like how we think of things, everything from like good forms like the epic or a novel down to bad forms like Snapchat. Sorry, I've lost my train of thought. But a chief among these for worth our thinking now is reality television, So it just is amazing to me that the television business was able to persuade people that they didn't need a union and they didn't need payment, and they would do their own makeup, use their own names, use their own houses for sets, get blocked, like walk around, stand under hot lights, affect artificial poses, and talk and get into arguments with people that they were like set up with like in a cage match, all in the name of brand burnishing for them. And, it just was like this crazy, brutal scab labor where they would keep paying out for the promise just to like create an artificial life, and we're used to it. Like, we're used to it. We're used to the fact that, that Trump did that. I mean, I can't get enough. I know lots of people can't, but of the tape on the Scotch tape on Donald Trump's tie. And, I was on the set of The Apprentice once, and it looks like a mahogany table, and surprise, surprise, it's like a Barnum & Bailey thing where it's like a staple gun and, particle board in the background. And, like, he just doesn't mind being like that. Like, he just doesn't mind that you can see his real skin under his makeup, or his, have some guesses at what his real hair might look like. I mean, I just would find it actually very fascinating. Just for a second, I don't want to embarrass him, but I just would like to see what he might look like, the actual, as a 70-year-old man with like very sparse white hair and rosacea. I just want to see it for a second, I'll undye my hair and wash my face too. Like, we can all do it. One of the, I don't know if this is totally addresses your question, but I've been really interested in this group of, well, these people who have been microdosing with LSD, but I don't do drugs. You don't have to do the LSD, but I did think there's a lesson in it. One of the groups that first did it were some Silicon Valley guys who wanted to break their addiction to Facebook, of all things, Facebook. And lots of people don't have much trouble breaking that addiction. But they wanted to get over this like completely stultifying interface of their phones. They just wanted to stop looking at this, but they couldn't. So they took this microdose, and they found that the faces of people on the bus were so fascinating. And, it is not uncommon in Silicon Valley to hear people say, I just was looking at a flower the other day. Whoa, that is an interface, that is a UX for the ages. And I do think that like the look of like modeled, I just heard a lecture on the return of hairiness, that like Johnny Ive hates hair, obviously, and like makes hairless glabrous, is the art history word for this. Textures that repel oil, that hate humans, and that, all of a sudden a new interest in like pores and hair, and it's probably no accident that we just want to look as little like our machines as possible now, like not sleek, not hairless, not oilless, not poreless, that just you wouldn't have guessed that when sleek Johnny Ive introduced the iPad that men would suddenly just be growing Benjamin Harrison beards. It's just like, it just was like a wonderful way the culture shoved back.
Thank you. I just have a personal experience regarding texting, social media addiction, being addicted with that. Because there was a time like I was working for media, and also I had a lot of interaction with public too. So all the text, comments, everything which I was receiving, they had a huge effect on me. And it was a kind of like, it was getting to my personal life. Like I had a lot of huge addiction, like a lot of headache. Why they said that comment, why someone said something like that. So I'm trying to control that one. And still, even like with my friends, when I miss them, when I want to see them, I just try to go and take a coffee and meet them.
Yeah.
It's the best. Because then I went to do a little bit research about that too. Like when you want to have communication with the people, like only 7% of communication, it's verbal. Otherwise, then the rest of them is the body language, the tone of your voice, all these stuff, they're gonna have a huge effect.
Yeah.
So I try to decrease it, but still it has an effect on me. When I'm expecting a call, or when I'm expecting a text, or when I'm posting something on Facebook or Twitter, I'm so much curious, like, okay, who saw that post? How many like it has?
Yeah.
Like, I'm sure everyone would have that experience. But how you can balance it, and how you would see this issue? Like, I'm sure a lot of youth, teenagers, they are facing with the same issues too, and especially with their romantic relations, and also public figures too. Like some of them, they are using it in the best way. As you said, President-elect, he used it in the best way.
Yeah.
For his own benefit. But balancing all these issues and not getting addicted to that, and not having that huge effect to the personal life, how you what's your idea about that?
I mean, I've noticed that friends of mine like you have made that decision that like I don't text, or just like, well, like if I text, they call, or they like quickly move to arrange to see each other. They just don't like texting, and I really respect people making those choices because, as I said, when I first saw the internet, I felt like great liberation from it, and I love, I like the experience of I like knowing that deep background. To me seems like the 2 billion users of the roughly 2 billion, 3 billion users of the internet somewhere out there. I love and find it very romantic to imagine that like I could that many people are coming through my phone. It's just still that squeal of information. But I can see how that would be overwhelming to people. Snowboarding's overwhelming to me, and whitewater rafting, and there are a lot of things people do that I just think I could never do that, and I'm not interested. And I recognize I'm slightly compulsive. I mean, if I didn't have this, I would definitely be scribbling all the time and, rating little weird pictures and stuff. So this makes it slightly saner. But that doesn't mean that everyone feels that way. And I remember a very close friend of mine said, first time she saw Twitter, just said, no. No way. I don't like the too muchness of it. I don't like the language of it. I don't like the tags. I don't like the aggression. And, I recognize that. But just being able to draw that line for yourself, I don't think the thing is intrinsically addictive any more than snowboarding is. I don't think it's a fault of the thing. I do think that some minds are inspired by that level of verbal communication, and other people feel like, as you say, that 93% of them is not being engaged. And I say that I've got a passion for it, but I'm also moving off it. I've been trolled a bunch of times since the election, and I skip off it for a few days. But when I'm in the heat of arguing about something or pursuing a story, I've noticed my body goes numb sometimes. Just literally, I don't have feeling. And I have to stay really, really aware of that with, acupuncture, meditation, just my fingers, I'm like becoming a brain in a vat, or worse, like a brain in a tweet. I'm just nothing, Yeah. And I'm out, my whole experience is here. It's our phones get hot. How sometimes your phone gets hot and it's overheating, the battery's draining. I had this happen once. I was thinking so many things. I thought I was doing something so important, and I was why is my phone draining? And it said, you're running too many apps in the background. And to this day, I'm Virginia, you are running too many apps in the background. Time for one more or no? Okay, we'll talk after. Thank you, guys.